Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Face the Nation. The world is facing a global a whirlwind as far as the global economy is concerned. Sri Lanka's economy has its own woes, and we have had our darkest times in the very, very recent past. Now that the elections are done, 3 elections consecutively, finally Sri Lankans have time to focus on something more important, something that will affect Sri Lankans a lot in the near future, which is how will Sri Lanka now try to come out of this economic crisis with the new government and also the local councils now in place. To discuss these matters and much more, we've got with us, of course, an expert panel, starting off with Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata. Thank you very much, Dhananath, for joining us on our program. We've also got with us Rohantha Athukorala, Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council. Thank you very much, Rohantha, for joining us on our program. We've also got with us George Cooke, Executive Director of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies. Thank you very much, George, for joining us on our program today. And last and certainly not least, we've got with us Chayu Damsinghe, the Head of Advisory at Frontier. Thank you very much, Chayu, for joining us on our program today. So let's get right into our topic of discussion today. Dhananath, you've spoken a lot about Sri Lanka's economy. Some of your clips during the economic crisis went viral, if I may say. So what do you think of the situation in Sri Lanka now? You are known to be very critical about some of Sri Lanka's policies, but now since people in Sri Lanka have chosen a new government, a government of change, if you will, how has it been the first 6 to almost 7 months since they've come into a power? Has there been enough change? Are you satisfied?
Shalin, I think the challenge is the first 100 days to 200 days. Generally it says the 100 days. So I think the government hasn't done anything, completely wrong, or they haven't missed any policies so far after 6-7 months.
So that's a positive thing?
That's a positive thing. Okay. So they haven't done anything like drastically wrong. They have maintained the IMF program. They have continued with the debt restructuring talks. So all those are positives. The challenge would be on growth reforms, and you're not doing the wrong thing may not rescue you from another crisis. You also at the same time do the right thing. My favorite analogy is like the cricket example. Just because you defend your wicket doesn't mean that you're going to win the match. You have to exceed the score of your opposing side, or you have to either bowl your 50 overs, or you have to all out them before they exceed your score. So I think we are defending the wicket, which is good, because if you are losing the wicket, then there's less hope. But the challenge is getting to the growth reforms. Now the growth reforms has to be achieved on a very dynamic global setup, especially with our key export market, US, and President Trump doing so many unpredictable changes. So that challenge is there on one side. I think the second challenge would be the weather, because so far we have been very lucky with weather for the last few years. So on that context, how are we going to move, shift our gears to growth is a challenge. Growth can only be achieved. That's why I always say, like a mantra, it's all about economic reforms, and that reforms has to take place. That's starting from mainly on our labor reforms, our land reforms, our economic transformation, which is quite required on the BOI front, industrial zone, state-owned enterprises reforms. Those reforms are a must if we were to really not only to defend the wicket, but also score and win this game.
So when you speak about these kind of reforms that you would like to see, it struck me as long-term reforms. So within these 7 months, has anything been done to at least lay, maybe say, a slight foundation for these reforms to then be built on?
if I were to be very critical, I think the process is slow. There could have been a lot to be done. For an example, on state-owned enterprises, they have appointed a new committee, which is in the right direction, but finally the reforms has to come, the new holding company bill has to come into the parliament, and then it has to be debated, because the more that you wait, it becomes very difficult, because then the opposition builds up the pressure and so many global events takes place and your priorities get changed, and we really do not have time. That's one. So and even on the central bank, I think independence, it was in the right direction, but I think strengthening it more and moving it forward is quite important. So I think I would say it's slow at the moment. Of course, there were 2 elections after the presidential election. So with that's what I say. Like with political priorities, it slightly get derailed sometimes. Rather than derailing, it is slower than we expected. Because 2028, we have to get ready for our debt repayments and all that. But I think on the first few months, getting the, going through with the IMF program and securing the debt restructuring, those things are positive. And in the tourism, they sorted that visa and visa issue. So those things are quite positive. But the challenge is the growth reforms. Those are 2 different mindsets. You can maintain the status quo. That's one mindset, which I think the government is doing okay. It is about completely changing the gears. It's like a Sanath Jayasuriya innings, like you really come out of the crease and play the ball and score runs. It's a different mindset. You take your shots, calculate the risk, and then you score runs. That's a completely different mindset. I think that's where the government needs to urgently shift gears.
Quite a lot of cricket analogies today, Dhananath. We'll get into more of those as the show progresses. Moving our attention to Rohantha Athukorala, Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council. Rohantha, now, tourism in Sri Lanka was doing quite well. I think we passed the $1 billion mark yesterday or just a few days ago. Is enough being done to promote tourism, to make Sri Lanka the tourist destination that we all would like it to be, mainly so that we can, increase our foreign revenue? Is enough being done? Can more be done? What is your forecast like for the rest of the year?
Shalin, thank you very much for having me on the program. It's a very interesting question, because if you look at some of the most low-hanging fruit of the country right now happens to be on this area of tourism, and everybody is cashing on it. They are looking for growth of the country coming from tourism. So the view of the private sector is that they were basically looking for a new direction on tourism, and asking as to how you're going to position the country somewhat differently in the global stage. So that is that aspiration which is there, and in that light, I think the most important critical success factor for that would be in terms of launching the global campaign. So in the global campaign was supposed to be coming out in January 2025, then subsequently it was moved back to March, then subsequently it was said end of April, and the industry is waiting for this campaign. Now, why is this campaign so pivotal, and why is it that I'm raising it in today's program, is that, see, if you look at all our competitive destinations, they tend to have between 2 to 3 campaigns globally that they would launch. And that comes with a lot of research, understanding who are the markets, how do they perceive your brand, and how you want to develop a stronger footprint in a global traveler's mind. Now, we have not actually got that off the ground, and that is something that I think that the private sector has to work with the public sector, because at the end of the day 99% of the industry happens to be owned by the private sector. So the consultation needs to be stronger, and maybe a more robust plan in terms of what is going to be launched needs to come out. So that is something that has to be done, and it has not happened, and it's a concern. A more broader view, Shalin, happens to be that where are we in terms of a country? You know, we know that we have got into a bankrupt situation, and then post that we have shown the world that we are a very strong country, showing a 5.2% GDP growth, when IMF, World Bank, everybody said it's about 3.5, 3.4 kind of a trajectory. So we made a statement to the world. From another side, if you look at our whole region is in collapse. You take the Bangladesh, you take the Pakistans, and very soon Maldives also is in trouble. Are the signs that we see. They got to pay about $1 billion next year, and they got about 300 million in their bank account. So we know that they are going to get into a cash trap situation. So in that light, Sri Lanka is shining. You know, at a 5.2.
But Rohantha, now these global campaigns to promote Sri Lanka as a tourist destination is nothing new for Sri Lanka. We've had global campaigns. Let's take the most recent one, So Sri Lankan. This was, of course, launched during the time we were going through the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. So, Rohantha, with the information that you have available, judging by the amount that Sri Lanka really spent on that campaign, I think some very popular YouTubers such as Nas Daily were also commissioned for this campaign. Was the return on investment there? My question leading being, do we need to do something drastically different on these campaigns that you say that Sri Lanka needs so much, or should we just stick to the script and do what we've already done before?
See, interesting question. See, when you say a global campaign, it is not what you do on social media. Yeah, it's where you find a distinctive position, not just a tagline. Tagline doesn't mean anything. You got to ask what kind of values does your country brand have to have, and then asking yourself how those values are to be built around a multimedia campaign.
So was that not the same concept? I mean, I refer to it as So Sri Lankan not just for the tagline, but wasn't all of this encompassed in the So Sri Lankan campaign that was launched? Was it just a video and a tagline?
It was mainly a social media campaign challenge. So that is not what typical.
So are you saying that Sri Lanka has not had a successful global campaign, the likes of which you would like to see for Sri Lanka to position itself as a tourist hotspot? No. Not
for the last 15 years.
Okay.
The last one that was held was something like 2011 was the closest that Sri Lanka saw. So now we need to do that, and the question is that we have about 11 billion Sri Lankan rupees in the account at the relevant ministry. So, and that money cannot be utilized anywhere else, because those are monies that have come in from the travelers who have gone in and the taxes that you have picked up. So the money is available. Now we need to make sure that the proper structure is done in terms of the advertising agencies, your research agencies, media agencies, and then how you run a global campaign. I mean, I hate to compare this, but if you take, for example, Maldives, I mean, since I work at a regional level, I see this. First is, the Sunny Side of Life campaign has not been changed for the last 15 years. You know, your successive governments that has come, it has never happened. Even if you take India, you know, Incredible India is a campaign that many governments have tried to do in the last 3 years to change it. 3 successive times the Modi government tried, but when the research was done and the top box score was very strong in terms of recall, the government said no. So they always said, we do the right thing to the world. So now, if you look at these two campaigns, they had above the line media, which is TV, radio, press, traditional, then you will have the social media campaign, then you have the influencer campaign, and they have one person whose whole job is to go all over the world and bring down the top sportsmen of the world, the Novaks and the Nadals of the world, to be brought in into Maldives. And so it's an integrated campaign, so that every single touch point that a traveler would want to visit before they select a destination, you have the brand hitting you. So that kind of touch point kind of campaigns, they are yet to mature out to practice in the country. And secondly is that, you know, it's not only just a campaign that you bring out, but you have to do a lot of brand equity research. Find out what kind of awareness levels are there in each of the markets, what are those values that they see you, and then ask yourself, how do I adjust my whole marketing communication campaign to build those values? So that kind of research savvy marketing communication, we are yet to mature out and learn that skill, and that's something that's quite hurtful that we are not seeing for Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much, Rohantha. We'll get into more as the show progresses. Moving my attention now to George Cooke, Executive Director of the Regional Centre for Strategic Studies. George, we see a lot of geopolitical turmoil. I mean, more closer to home than we would like, especially between India and Pakistan, and of course with the other countries in the region also reacting to now what is happening there. How do you see the geopolitical turmoil that we're experiencing now impacting Sri Lanka's position in coming out of this economic crisis? And also, of course, I would like if you could touch on the turbulent nature of the United States with US President Donald Trump now in office, imposing tariffs, removing tariffs, changing alliances. How do you see this?
Thank you very much for the invitation once again, Shalan. Looking at where we are from a geopolitical perspective, we're obviously seeing a lot happening, a lot that we have no control over at all. We've got to adapt to the environment, the neighborhood, and what is going on around us. How are we doing that? Is it always a challenge? Is it always a problem? Are we always worried about outcomes of some of those situations? Or are we looking at opportunities in there? Are we looking at how we're going to use the saying, make hay while the sun shines? The sun is shining for us at the moment. This is our opportunity. How are we going about doing that? This is where, when we had the conflict, other countries were thriving. They were really doing very well because people were hesitant to come here. Now, this is where we need to look at how we can maximize. It seems very crude. It doesn't seem like the nice thing to do. But that's international relations. You're going to have to realize that. You're going to have to make the most out of every opportunity that comes our way. Now, this is where we have to start strategizing. This is where we have to be mindful of the fact that a problem between neighboring countries, that is an opportunity sometimes for us to do something. It's an opportunity that we will get as a result of a fallout from that relationship going sour or changing a certain course. But that's where we've got to do a lot of in-depth, introspect, thinking there in terms of what are we doing, how are we making progress there. So a lot of things are happening in the region. The main fear is the nuclear aspect of it in terms of what could happen. Because they are both nuclear countries, India and Pakistan, and it is very concerning. It's not only going to affect them, it's going to affect us all. Closer to seas, it's going to affect marine life. It's going to really devastate the region. But some of those things are completely out of our control. We can try to speak, we can try to help, but are they going to listen to us? That's a different question that we have to revisit there. Gone are the days in which we mediated conflicts and got involved. And that was a different era, under a different ideology or a different way of thinking back then. But looking at some of the bigger developments out there, the United States, what is going on with vis-a-vis America, countries in West Asia, America, the Russia-Ukraine issue, America, and so many other issues in the world, we've got to always be mindful that, yes, we are a small cog in a big wheel, but at the same time, we must not be completely outside of what is going on. We have to be really attuned to what is taking place. Whether it is the American president's visit to Saudi Arabia, his landing in Qatar shortly, whatever it may be, these are having impacts in those countries. Are there opportunities for us? Are there things that we can do? We have missions in these countries. How closely are we monitoring these situations? There are other developments taking place in other parts of the world. There are things happening in Europe. There are things happening in Canada. How concerned are we? How worried are we? So a lot of it is, in terms of what is happening, it's out of our control, but there are lots of things that come out of it, that we can benefit from that. This is where we have to look for opportunities amidst these challenges. Very often we don't do that, but that is exactly what we should be doing.
Thank you very much, George Cooke. A very interesting perspective on how to respond to the turmoil, especially in the region. We now move our attention to Chayu Damsinghe, Head of Advisory at Frontier. Chayu, much was spoken on various aspects in Sri Lanka, of course, that finally have an impact on the way of life and our economy, our survival in the coming years. What's your take on everything that's happening here in Sri Lanka? Is it to your liking, or are you like Dhananath, not very happy about things?
I think on the economy itself, I think we have to take it in context, not just in context of the crisis, and that's an easy thing to do. Obviously, things are better than they were at the depth of the crisis, and that's a pretty obvious thing. But also, I think, in contrast with what other countries usually look like in a post-crisis environment, and looking at what the context of Sri Lanka's crisis was, and that was decades of fiscal mismanagement, leading also into a large external kind of deficit situation that compounded as well. The fiscal situation in Sri Lanka's recovery pathway has been pretty good, and when I say pretty good, it's been one of the best in the world in terms of the recovery in that kind of 2 to 3 year period. For Sri Lanka as a country that has never got its fiscal right, that's pretty remarkable. It comes from a point of something we have literally always gotten wrong. Finally, now essentially across 3 governments from 2022 to 2025, we managed to get that right.
But Chayu, why do you think that was possible? I mean, for 70 years and over the course of maybe 15 IMF programs, we've not got our fiscal policies right. But the moment, we hit rock bottom, now in a matter of 2 years, 3 years, everything is whoopsie daisy. Why do you think that is?
So I think, there's always the little things about, it was this mechanism, the Central Bank Act and the independence, the lack of monetary financing. You can talk about specific decisions at the Treasury, you can talk about specific aspects of how the credit system, the banking system also wasn't able to provide the government as enough financing for it to do whatever it wanted. There are all those little I think, mechanisms, but how I would take it overall is the fact that when you're in a situation where you have an entire structure that allows the government to run large deficits, let's put it at a very simple point, and you have a massive crisis, that system changes. The pain of that system both onto the people, onto the economy, and the way the entire structure shifts therein, I think is the way I look at it overall. So that shift is a structural shift is what I would say.
So that shift has happened, it's happening?
I would say if you asked me 2 years ago, I would have said that shift is in the process of happening. Right now, I would say the shift has happened. Structurally, the Sri Lankan economy is now fundamentally different than it was a few years ago. The question is, the economy has not gotten used to the fact that it has now shifted. So now, what we are right now in the context, I think, is getting used to what that means. That means different costs, different benefits from the past.
So when you say, you're speaking in very technical terms, but you're just saying that the system has changed, but the people are still getting used to it. Am I right?
What I say is the way the economy works, let's say where the money goes, how the money goes, what drives those incentives, what parts of the economy it goes into, all that has, I think, structurally changed as a result of the fact that a huge chunk of the economy went through a crisis. You had a huge chunk of the government being constrained in very varied ways, and that has resulted in certain angles of the economy getting locked off, certain angles opening up. I think again, for 70 years, we've gotten used to a different type of economy. We've gotten used to an economy where we consume more and more every year. We've gotten used to an economy where the government finances that. We've gotten used
everything's incentivized.
Everything's incentivized, and that system has worked. It did bring quite a lot of growth into the system in the past as well. And right now, in a context, we are running primary surpluses, increasing primary surpluses every year. The current account is still in a surplus. These are not things that, like Rohantha said earlier, these are not things not only did the IMF not expect, these are not things that sustain in the same way that in many other countries. This is relatively quite different. So I think the depth of the crisis, how much things broke during the crisis, is a big part of why they have still not been able to go back to where it was. It's a different type of economy. So it comes with the very different types of costs. So people are still much poorer in relative terms than they were earlier, but the economy's size is larger. How does that work? That's not a contradiction, I think. I think that happens as a result of different aspects of the economy being larger. The government is stronger. When I say stronger, I don't mean in terms of the governance side of things. I mean in terms of their financial strength, they're in a relatively stronger place than they were before. But within the economy, there are much better margins that happen as a result of the way inflation has come down. So the purchasing power, the trajectory of how purchasing power works, how much people buy, has shifted. This doesn't mean things have gone back to normal, gone back to the same economy that we were. But it's a different type of economy, which will then go in the future also in a different direction than I think what we have gotten used to the Sri Lankan economy to look like in the past.
But is that a good thing or a bad thing, Chayu?
I would say it's neither. I think that's just the part of the way the economy of a country like Sri Lanka changes, right? It's good in that it means that some of the particular problems of the past, that is those very strong up and down cycles where you have crises. Once every 3 to 4 years you have an exchange rate crisis. Once every 3 to 4 years you have an inflationary interest rate kind of problem. That particular form of that problem no longer exists in the same way. Now, for the last 3 years we are looking at appreciation. Points at which depreciation has tried to come in has not really materialized. So I think those particular types of problems are no longer there, but you are looking at different types of problems right now. So you are looking at the fact that your point of income growth and the way that income growth happens will be different, and but potentially quite slower. Might be a lot more dependent on remittance growth than it was in the past. That means people continue to be moving out of the country. So that might be a different pathway. I can't say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I would just say that the costs are different compared to the past.
So to achieve this growth that Dhananath was speaking of, then what should the government focus on? Allowing the economy to go on this trend, giving it a helping hand, maybe changing it a little bit more?
I think I take a slightly different perspective than Dhananath did, in that I don't personally think that a lot of growth remorse at this stage is the only way forward. I think particularly if you look at what led to the growth in 2024, because there's the most recent year of full growth that we've had. And that's growth for a full year that has happened since 2017 essentially. So we've had essentially a 7-year recession. We're only now getting out of it. So what happened there primarily was that you had most prices in the economy went up about say 2 to 3%. So everyone's revenues grew up, everyone's salaries go up just a little bit, right? Nothing major. But then you have energy prices falling. So what that results in, everyone's revenue grows at a certain level, your costs also grow, except one particular cost, and that is energy. And that results in a kind of a margin expansion in the economy. Across every household, every industry, every business, you have a slight improvement in the margin. And that margin expansion means that a lot of the debt that was built up over the last few years, last decades, now you can pay a little bit more every month. A lot of the investment that you early needed to finance from new debt, now you have a little bit more money in your cash flows themselves to kind of finance. So that's a different type of economic growth that happens. So inflation coming down in a particular way was a big part of what allowed that. And I think the fact that energy prices actually went down that first quarter, lots of questions about how that was calculated, but it had done that, also pushed that a little bit forward. Now, what I think a government should do is to recognize the fact that we are not living in the same economy of the past. The same economy of the past that allowed you to just borrow cheaply from abroad, pump that into the economy through your government budget, and then push growth. That economy does not exist. And if the government tries, any government, this or otherwise, tries that approach again, I think that's destined to fail, not just for the fact that those mechanisms no longer exist, but also the fact that the economy fundamentally right now doesn't grow in that same way. The growth in the economy is now driven by industries and businesses deciding to take whatever capital they have and put it into a particular location. The problem isn't now economy-wide, you just want money and you can just spend it anywhere you like. There aren't anywhere else to spend. There's a lack of particular types of investment decisions for the individual, for the business, and for, of course, the large-scale investor as well. So I think for the government, my top-line message in context like this is don't get stuck in the past. Look, recognize the fact that the economy has changed, and that means different modes of growth. That means different types of costs. Don't try to fix the costs of the past and then end up missing out of the costs of the present.
Very interesting perspectives on our opening statements on Face the Nation today. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On my right, we've got Niresh Eliathambi, and on my left, Shihar Aniz. The floor is yours.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Shalan. I want to start with what George said. You said Sri Lanka should be able to capitalize opportunities, whether it's a crisis or otherwise. Are we there? Is our foreign policy ready for that? Because we have seen in the past we have been struggling with how to balance the countries, how to balance India and how to balance China, US, right? We have been always struggling on this foreign policy. Though we had or we say that we have a non-aligned foreign policy, it's not true, right? Are we there to capitalize those opportunities? And what should the the government do for that?
Are we there? No. Can we get there? Yes. How do we get there? What are we going to do in that regard? This is where we've got to start with something very simple. Start with research. Start going into these areas. The state has several institutions under it. The foreign ministry has institutions, the defense ministry has institutions. These institutions are there for a purpose. In other countries, they serve a certain role. What is that role? In order to garner as much information as possible and put it on the table, so the policy maker, the final decision taker, has multiple options in front of them. They don't just pick from one topic. They don't just rely on one piece of information. They must have multiple options before them. This is what we need, and this is what we don't have very often. And as a result of that, our decisions sometimes might be considered poor. They might not have been the most optimum or decisions that we could have taken. But any of these situations that are happening, we need to have in-depth studies going on in order to understand the impact this is having on one side, how negatively it's going to impact us, but how we're going to turn that into something that is going to be beneficial to us. Whether it is trade, whether it is shipping, whether it is the airline industry, whether it is tourism, we can benefit from a lot of these. When India and the Maldives had issues, this was a golden opportunity for us to go all out and capitalize on attracting the Indian market. Instead, we had a certain person going to India and saying, we are part of India. So you see, you went to an extreme there. No one asked us to become a part of India. It was all about attracting the Indian tourist into Sri Lanka. But we sometimes don't know what we're doing on those stages.
So, George, just for me to understand practically as to what's happening here. Now, are you saying that those who are supposed to do this research, those who are supposed to come up with the policy and then present multiple options to the decision makers are just pushing buttons? What's happening there? Is it not happening at all? Is it happening in an unproductive way? Because based on Sri Lanka's past experiences, usually how foreign policy or literally anything used to work was, the person who has the ear of the decision maker wins, or the person who more often than the ear has the pocket of the decision maker also wins. Might be even a better chance. So where is it now? Has it changed in 7 months? Is it changing? What's happening?
I hope it's
practically.
I hope it's changing. I'm not privy to what's happening inside that institution, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
But by the looks of it?
By the looks of it, yeah, it's changing. Hopefully it will change. Hopefully it will change in that direction.
But how bad was it to begin with?
You see, when it comes to...
Are we starting from below zero?
Yeah, when it comes to making a decision here, Shalan, if I am holding a certain portfolio, I decide on something and I tell you, let's do this. And then you want to curry favor with me and you will say, yes, sir, let's do that.
Oh, okay.
But that has got to change. That has got to change. We've got to challenge. We've got to put forward. You're not doing it in a rude manner, in a crude way. You're doing it in a very productive way, which they will appreciate as well. They will definitely appreciate, because you're opening the vistas for them. You're removing the blinkers. You're letting them see multiple avenues that they can take. They will really appreciate that.
George, do our policymakers in any government actually understand the value of research? Because we had a president who suddenly decided that our agriculture doesn't need fertilizer, okay?
Chemical fertilizer.
Chemical fertilizer, which our agriculture sector had been dependent on. And you just, any person who's ever planted even a chili plant will tell you, you can't suddenly change, from one day to the next, you can't be changing fertilizer. And then we had ministers of health who were touting this Dhammika Paniya nonsense. So, do our policymakers really understand what research actually means?
Very good point there.
I'm talking about across the board.
Across the board, absolutely across the board. You see, something that we fail to realize is that the day before the election, the day of the election, and the day after the election, the person is the same. Their office changes, their vehicle may change, where they stay may change. That changes, their position changes, but they don't change. That person's capacity remains the same. The voter's intellect does not come through the ballot. We do not have that process happening. That does not transpire. So this is where they've got to surround themselves with people who have some kind of experience, some kind of knowledge, some kind of in-depth area of understanding on a particular subject. Now you've got to have the capacity to attract such people to you. That is within your perimeter. or within that of your party. You have got to ensure that you have the right people on board. That particular example that you gave, just because one person from a totally different field comes and tells you that you should do this in this sector, if you're going to accept it, that's highly questionable of you.
No, George, nations, any nation has interests which are basically what's best, or they think this is what's best for our country. And these interests don't change overnight. What's good for our country in tourism today, will be the same for a while at least. In the same way, foreign affairs, same thing. But do we as a nation, in your opinion, do we know what our best interests are? Because if you ask India, they know what their best interests are. China, they know. Donald Trump thinks he knows. Verdict is still out on that, but at least they believe in something. But do we actually know?
Nilesh, this is where it has to be very clearly articulated. If you are a Sri Lankan diplomat out there, if you are a policy maker out there, you must have your priorities right. This is where we've always seen in the past a leader being labeled pro-American, a leader being labeled anti-American, pro-Indian, anti-Indian, pro-Chinese, anti-Chinese. A question I've always asked is, where's the pro-Sri Lankan leader? Let's put Sri Lanka's interests first. Yes, those are powerhouses out there which we've got to contend with, but who is looking after our brief? Who is representing us? Who is talking on our behalf? Who is negotiating on our behalf? We can't just give in to these countries. We've got to be very clear in terms of what our national interests are, and everyone has to be singing off the same sheet. Very often we're not doing that. If you are proactive and you want to do that in a mission, you will do it. If I'm in a mission and I don't want to do it, I don't do it. So it's a good thing you're there at least, because you're going to make sure that something positive happens for the country. Something is coming back home. But that has got to be enforced. That is where there has to be a lot more strategy involved in what is being done. Any form of policy formulation needs to have that strategy of what we want to achieve. Very often we don't know what we want to achieve. Everybody is not on the same page. Everybody has to be brought onto the same page. Everybody has to be very clear how we are going to achieve those results. It's not a case of you just achieve this and do it any way you want to do it. There must be clarity in that area. This is what we badly need.
Dhananath, now I like the way you put this, the way you praise the government that it has not messed up so far, right? But at the same time you said that you need growth, right? Economic growth and reforms. I mean, how do you see that, given that this is the same government with the parties which protested for every reforms in the past, plus there's a question about their capacity, right? For instance, like the way they handled the Trump's tariff, right? It was obvious that it was going to come on I think February 5th, but we just kept this for 1 month until suddenly Trump announced, and then these people came and said like we are trying to negotiate before March 9th to reduce it to 10%, which never happened, right? So it raises question about their experience, maturity, and their professionalism about handling the crisis. How do you see this?
I'm not the political expert, but my view is, Shihar, there's government politics and there's opposition politics. I think now what has happened is those who have been in the government now moved to opposition and they are playing opposition politics. Those who were in opposition, who basically opposed at one point on many of those things, now have come to the government and come to the realization it's a dead end if we were to continue on the same thing that we were opposed at one point. So I do not see a different route. I don't think anyone can see without those changes. So I think that's why I think they also get some comments like, okay, you opposed to it when you were in the opposition and now your same government proposing it. Of course, on Trump's tariff, I think as always, there was room for improvement. But it wasn't like a big mess or a big policy misstep. I mean, if they were to completely trying to renegotiate a debt sustainability analysis or if they were to going for renegotiating on the debt, then I would say it's a serious policy misstep. I think these things could have been addressed quite earlier, but I still don't see as a major misstep. But on the geopolitical front, where George is the expert, look at our history. I mean, we haven't done very poorly. I mean, look at for the last 5 years. With whom are we, I mean, have we corresponded or like negotiated well? With US, we had a problem with MCC and always there were protests in opposite the embassy. With Chinese, we ordered this fertilizer ship and then we cancelled it and they blacklisted our banks and there was a court case. With Japan, we cancelled the LRT. With India, there was a lot of issues with ECT and always there was a problem. With Qatar and the Middle East, there was that burial issue. With Russia, there was during Yahapalana time there was this insect. I mean, on
Asbestos.
issues happen.
shit.
So overall, with all our neighbors, we were playing very childish because we were not managing it diplomatically. So and now as a result, we have lost the credibility. So on that front, I think things could have been improved. And if that's the case, now there's a golden opportunity to capitalize on our strategic location and get things moving. Now what has happened on our shipping routes, power has been moved to this Visanjam port and things are developing on the other side. So I think the government could have now, since it's a fresh mandate on them, since they are new on power, I think that's something that the government could capitalize. I think even in their mandate, in their manifesto, that has been clearly mentioned. The tariff reforms, the national single window, and the customs ordinance, that has been clearly mentioned on the trade front.
But then there is an issue with the energy pricing, right? Which IMF also has raised concern about, energy pricing, and there is kind of a discussion still taking place about, the current prices are not reflecting the market prices. About that.
100%. So there's no formula without restructuring the CEB to bring these prices down. I mean, you can continue to increase the prices when the cost goes up. But I don't think that's a sustainable solution. By trying to do that, the government will lose their political capital because now they have basically mentioned that they will bring the electricity prices down, and from June 1st, when you increase it, you basically lose the credibility. And then you can see the industries will they will raise their concerns. The hoteliers will have a big issue with like electricity prices going up, and I think we all know the story afterwards. So I think the important thing is to government to move ahead with that electricity, the CEB reform.
But how realistic is this? Because I've been in this business 35 years, and I heard this 35 years ago. CEB reform. It's that mythical rainbow in the sky.
I think, with all due credit, I think things could have been better, but during last minister's time, he pushed the reform. I think it was a bill approved in the parliament, and I think he had kept, I think if I remember right, about 6 months period that you could move things forward. So it was not impossible. There will be resistance, but the bill was moved into the parliament and it was approved. So it's a matter of execution. It was at the edge of execution. Of course, then things changed. But I don't see, that's where the government with a 2/3 majority, that's where they have to capitalize on their political capital. Because of course, these reforms will not be popular. Let's be very honest. Who wants to reform CEB? Of course, these engineers have a monopoly power and there will be power cuts. And we saw that story. But that will bring sustainable economic growth and solutions where when there's an election comes in, where they can utilize, because if the reforms were to execute it now, you can see the benefits at a later point. So that's why I always recommend that in the first year at least, ideally it could have been the first 100 days, but at least within the first year, you move the hard reforms. And that's the state-owned enterprises, electricity, Petroleum Corporation, those are the tough ones.
But Dhananath, when you say CEB reforms, do you mean, breaking it down, transmission, production and privatizing it? That's the reform?
No, first you have to unbundle it, the generation, transmission and distribution. And then you have to open it for competition. And I understand the networking industry's unbundling is quite complicated because Then you have to bring already generation in a way. There are private sector companies who can also generate. Transmission is a challenge. I think what they have proposed is a state-run transmission company where the two other companies, the distribution company and the generation companies, contribute for the transmission. So it's in a way an acceptable solution.
So that's what has been proposed by the NPP, is what you're saying.
It was not the NPP, but NPP was also in the conversation, and they stood for the electricity reforms. And when they appointed the chairman, he was also, I mean, pretty much in a way for unbundling. I think the concerns was on the mix and all that, the energy mix, but I think research was done, since he spoke about research, and I think it moved to a certain extent which this government could have prioritized it. That's what I said. By delaying it, now it's getting difficult, but I still think for the next 6 months you have to accelerate and do it.
But the unbundling, we've seen this before. Again, about 3 decades ago, LECO was launched and was supposed to take over some of the distribution. And it did in certain areas. LECO is the distributor. But of course, it's owned by CEB. But that's partial unbundling. Then you had Lanka Transformers, which was a joint venture with, I think, a Nordic company, which was involved in various support activities, including generation. So this started and then stalled. And it stalled because the CEB didn't really want it, the powers which control the CEB.
No, I agree. I mean, there was some level of reforms, but I think this time, because it was an issue with the Act, and it was moved to the Parliament, it was at the edge of getting it executed. But I will tell you, if they don't do it, what would happen? The same thing that happened, because when the CEB makes losses, they will get fuel on debt from the Petroleum Corporation. Now your CEB loss being parked at CPC, and when that happens, CPC sells jet fuel to Sri Lankan Airlines at a premium price. So then the Sri Lankan Airlines starts making losses, or it's already loss making. Your losses will escalate, and then all these 3 institutes will go to the 2 state banks. That's exactly what happened. That's the People's Bank and the BOC. And now the balance sheet of the People's Bank and Bank of Ceylon will be in trouble. Now the losses of one because of the CEB, now it has gone for all 5 other entities. And then what the previous government did, they allocated 450 billion to rescue these 2 banks. Now 450 billion is about 2 times of Asasuma budget allocation. So if they don't do it, the same thing will happen. Other option is, as you can see, they have to increase the electricity prices. But what would happen when you will increase the electricity prices? All the industries will come and say, look, how are we going to survive at these electricity prices? And it's already regionally, which is quite high. So by not doing it, you are doing a greater harm for industries, for everybody, because ultimately this will pass. You can see the next 2 budget cycles. At one point, because it's politically not favorable when electricity prices going up, then it will come to inflation, because in the central bank inflation calculation, electricity has a higher weightage. Then the inflation, you see it's picking up, it's politically not favorable. Then what they would do, they will say, okay, we'll even sell the electricity lesser than the cost of production. Then you are going to the same problem, and that's why even the IMF is quite concerned. They wanted to, I think, their mandate is very clear. You cannot sell electricity below the cost of production. Why? Because they know these losses will go across all the other institutes, and that's the end of the game. That's simply the end of the game, because then you start printing money. Now it's you cannot do it under the new Central Bank Act, but you have still options, or else you are adding pressure on your side, I mean on the government side, either to change the Central Bank Act and looking at alternative options. So you are making a miserable situation on your own. And also we have to understand, while I'll agree with Chayu, the numbers looks amazing, which is good. I think 5% economic growth, inflation is down, but we also need to understand the context. We had economic contraction, so we had a lower base. So from a lower base, we got into 5%. And our population was not growing as we expected. It's one of the lowest, and there was a lot of people left the country. Thanks to, I always point the fingers on modern monetary theorists who said no inflation with money printing, and so thanks to them, a lot of people left, and as a result, you have 4,500 per capita GDP. So if you are not doing the reforms, you're challenging the entire nation, and you're risking the lives of the people who stayed and decided to fight.
Now, Chayu, 5% economic growth, the GDP growth last year, but that's not enough. What should we be looking at for the next 3-4 years? What should our target be? Again, this comes back to, what do we know what our target, our interest is? Are we going to be happy with 5.5%? Is that going to be enough? Because we can pat ourselves on the back and say 5% last year, 5% this year, but then 2028, when we are suddenly told we can't make our debt repayments, we'll be scratching our heads wondering, well, what about all that GDP growth?
So I think what can cause the economy to kind of grow, and what kind of growth that we should aim for. I think again I would take it back to the point that the drivers of growth of the past are simply just not functional anymore, right? And it's not the drivers of the growth of the past. We had, like most countries in the world, we had very strong GDP growth from about 2005 to 2015, and that's not a Sri Lanka specific point. That was a point at which in very short, you had a point where you had a lot of money, capital going in from China to the US to China. You had a huge unipolarity, bipolarity kind of created there, and that helped a lot of money and a lot of trade go through the rest of the world. For the developing world, that was a period of massive growth. We are not looking at that same kind of world anymore. So we aren't really looking at the context where that cheap money, that cheap access to trade is no longer, that's not the growth driver for the future. So I mean, in that sense, perhaps 5% might be pretty spectacular to see, because you're not talking about a context where you have those drivers. 5% might be great if you actually manage to maintain it for the next few years. I think in terms of what you want to aim at, I would actually think that 5% or so might be fine in terms of reaching those the kind of economic situation that allows us to meet those debt targets. I think somewhere in the even 4% growth, 5% growth, I think that will be relatively fine, because compared to, I think, from the earlier ways that we were talking about those debt deals, the ramp up in 2020, you call it a maturity wall, it's less of a wall, it's a little bit of a staircase instead. It's not a sudden ramp up, it does go every year from 25, 26, 27, 28. So it's a lot more manageable. It's not something that will catch us off guard, in my view. And I think something that also helps the Sri Lankan economy at that point is, again, historically, we've been a country that borrows in order to finance our imports as well. So we run not just a trade deficit, but a current account deficit as well. Yeah? You don't, overall, if you just take that is essentially trade of goods, services and labor, if you take remittance as trade in labor, you essentially run a deficit. You're not really in that context, and you're running a surplus. And that's not something Sri Lanka is used to. So I think that means that every year, now, I think the point I would point to there is the fact that in April, when you had some amount of exchange rate pressure coming in, you had some of the LCs that are probably coming due in April from the vehicle imports that got relaxed in March, and you had a global level of Asian currencies depreciated because of the tariffs. Despite that context, the central bank still was able to buy dollars into their reserves. So usually that indicates there was still enough extra dollars for the central bank to buy into their system, and it did something that they did to stop the rupee from depreciating necessarily. So I think what that indicates is that the Sri Lankan economy is one that is now a little bit more geared than in the past towards maybe having a little bit more extra dollars here and there. It might not be massive, but here and there you're having enough dollars. So I think by 2028, I'm not particularly concerned of the debt wall at that point. I think there's a bigger concern at the 2032, 33 point, because at that point you are talking about 7-8 years into the future. There's about 2 to 3 election cycles away. So that is enough time for things to change. 2028, I don't think is enough time for things to dramatically change enough. And even on that growth side, I think a very particular point that I will take in tying into my previous point too is that on how the situation on even from the energy side has changed. 2 years ago, our problem was we didn't have enough energy in the country. We weren't generating enough electricity. Right now, the problem has shifted. Now we are talking about the fact that during the daytime, because of the massive increase in solar power, particularly rooftop solar, we now have too much energy coming into the system and the grid can't handle it. That's a different problem. That's not a problem. That still causes power cuts. The grid can't handle it. The weakness in the grid is now more
That's
apparent.
only on Sunday, right? That's only on sunny Sundays or holidays.
That's only on Sundays and holidays right now, but that's purely that this is without any large-scale solar deployment by the government, by massive private players. This is just rooftop solar that has ramped up on its own. So this is just private participation in the economy that has really ramped up generation. So this context has changed. Over the next few years, you have 100 megawatts, say 100 megawatts that are supposed to come in online, and you're probably going to have some amount of rooftop solar coming in anyway. So my point is that earlier where point where you were just significantly under generating, now you have point you are actually looking at over generating at certain point. So the problem is now different. Now it is not you need to invest in generation. Now it is far more important to urgently invest in the transmission and distribution side of things, and that is now that now becomes the constraint in the system, and that's a different problem altogether.
But then Chayu, I mean, while saying that your example is interesting, but like Dhananath said, we've been having some favorable weather, good rain, hydroelectricity generation has been up, so your scenario could change drastically.
I would disagree.
If we don't.
No, actually, I would disagree, because historically Sri Lanka has only done well when the weather when it is raining. Now we are moving into a context you actually generate when the weather is raining through hydropower, and now you're also generating when there's drought cause you now have solar power. We have, I mean, obviously you don't generate as much solar during the entire day, but if you just take the installed capacity, we have more installed solar capacity than we have coal right now. Obviously you can't generate as the same amount, but the installed capacity is very large. I think that's something that has gotten missed in a lot of the discussion over the last week. It's massive. You don't generate as much because it's only applicable for a few hours of the day, obviously. But that's only this is something that happened in about, I think we hit 2030's target in 2025. So we are actually overperforming, and that's not the kind of target Sri Lanka is supposed to overperform. And this is purely private play. This is not the government, making the, paving the pathway and doing it really well.
It's rooftop solar.
Rooftop solar is the biggest driver of this kind of content.
How do you see the start of serving external debts in 2028? I mean, there are some concerns over a possible repeated default in 2028, given that if there are risks on the economic growth and our foreign inflows, right? How do you see that?
At this rate, I again think that the 2028 point is less of a concern for me. I think more the problem is at the point where it ramps up once again in 2032-33, because in order for us to meet the 2028 target, I think the IMF's expectation was we would run deficits in the current account. So every year you would need to actually find an extra $1 billion, and then somewhere in 2026, 2027, you would borrow $1 billion in order to pay that 2028 period. 2020 from about middle 2022, so from the third quarter of 2022, 2023, 2024, and now the first quarter of 2025, every year we've actually had surplus of dollars. If you take the IMF's numbers and how the debt numbers behind those debt restructuring numbers did not account for those kinds of numbers. You're talking about a context where Sri Lanka returns to running a deficit like it usually has. So that 2028 point, I think is, we've already, I think, collected more dollars than we've expected to do at this point, and I think that 2028 period is going to be not too much of a problem. For me, again, the concern is you can maybe muddle through and you can deal through 2028, 2029. By the time you get to 2031, 32, 33, when those numbers increase and you have to borrow over the next 5 years anyway, that is the point I think becomes more of a concern, and there's a lot more points at which things can change dramatically to create problems there.
Rohantha, now tourism is one of the key factors that will bring revenue, foreign exchange. However, we see kind of a slowdown in tourism. If you compare the monthly tourist arrival from I think March and April compared to 2018, there is a slow trend. So I mean, how do you say? I mean, George was talking about using crisis for the benefit of Sri Lanka. Are we really doing that for tourism?
See, yeah, I mean, you're right. The organic growth is weaning down, which normally happens when you don't drive a brand. It's normal. I mean, even if you take the FMCG sector, you might have a growth of about 1.5% to 2%. That will happen anyway, even if you don't market a brand. People will keep buying the brand because their mom used it or their neighbors are using the product. But then if you have a thrust of communication, your awareness level increases, you reach more people, and obviously from that it trickles down to more travelers coming into your country and buying your brand, so naturally it grows up. But the bigger issue right now is that, you know, what we see currently from a policy perspective is that we are so engraved on the issues inside the country, and we are battling the war inside, that we are not engaging the opportunities in the marketplace, which is the serious issue.
You mean international market?
International market. I mean, it's not only in tourism, even if you look at exports. I mean, end of the day, our FTA with Thailand is on a standstill. If you look at our FTA with Singapore, once again it's a no-go because there's a case against it at that end. Then if you look at the FTA with India, I think in 2004 when I was chairman of the Export Development Board, we were talking about, I think, $500 million or $550 million. Today, after 20 years, we are at $850 million. So, I mean, if you compute that, you know, we are at a 0.12% of the import bill of India. India will import bill at about $720 billion, and we are like at 0.12. So the question is that, you know, you have that if the CEPA were to be introduced, the government of India said we are going to give you 30 million pieces, not just the current 7 million pieces which is in place. The 15,000 kilograms of tea is going to be further extended, you know. So you know, utilization is very low, but the question is that there are non-tariff barriers which are in play. But this is where, you know, the relationship right now between Sri Lankan government and government of India is so strong that we can cut through those barriers, because we know the last term of the Prime Minister of India, and he can make some drastic changes where he could overrule certain you know, state-wise rules that are there and help the country, because in the end we had to pay $4 billion to India because they helped us during the times of trouble. So those kinds of discussions is not actually bringing us the impact, and that's going to be very hurtful in the future, because you know, even if you look at our GSP plus utilizations, we use only just 50%. Why? Because you have these rules of origin that comes to play, where we have to buy the yarns from a SAARC country, and if you buy it from a SAARC country, then only we can say we can use the 100%. Now currently we buy it from maybe Indonesia. So now there is a paper that has been floated where we are trying to say, please recognize, you know, purchasing from Asian region, but that decision has not yet come. So what I'm saying is that, you know, we have to look at exports of services and the exports of merchandise as an overall strategy. And you know, even if you look at the export basket right now, 7 countries give you almost 60% of the revenue. Now the question is that, you know, there's so much of discussion on this GSP plus, but do you know that we have 27 countries that we can export to, but we are not capitalizing on it. You know, we are not gone out there. We know that people are looking at Africa as a region, but then, you know, we have 3 embassies, which is in Africa, in Ethiopia and Kenya. Now in that we have only 1 trade officer, others are just shells, you know. So then how do you drive those markets, you know, because if you're not there to negotiate, you know, help in certain barriers that come in, the local officer which is not there, then, you know, you know, it's only just words that you put in terms of driving exports. So our exports, which were like what, 16.7 billion last year, we have set a target of
including
19
the services, right?
Including services,
yeah.
And we are saying that we are going to be 19 billion. This is what was mentioned in the budget. Though the export numbers add up to 18.2 billion, but let's say 19 billion for simplicity's sake. Ideally, we should be at 25 billion, and that can come from India. We are looking at a large market there. The relationship is good, but then, you know, that strategy has not worked It's not in the agenda. We have not heard this kind of conversations, and same goes even with tourism. I mean, end of the day, there are 350,000 millionaires in India, you know, and
Billionaires.
billionaires, and we are looking at, let's say, attracting 1% of them to Sri Lanka, just 1%, which we are not, and there are countries in the region who is attracting them, and they normally come on a Friday and go back on a Sunday. You know, they don't come and stay for 7-8 days. But then you also have the Ramaniya trail, which you can extend to 14 days, and the type of clientele that comes in, they spend between $600 to $700 a night, because it's a different kind of age group that comes. So these opportunities are there, but we need a trust agency that looks at this external perspective. And if you don't drive our income generation in, you know, we cannot start controlling our expenditure, because at the end of the day, I mean, our expenditure is 7.2 trillion Sri Lankan rupees, and our income is only 4.9 million. That's the revenue that the government gets. So there is a gap already.
But Rohantha, do you see, I mean, have you seen any kind of policy measures from the government on tourism? You know, this is going to be the policy for next 5 years, something like that, because the government is this year targeting $5 billion revenue and 3 million tourist arrival.
Yeah.
For me, it looks like very ambitious.
So current estimates is that we might fall short by about 0.5 billion. It might. But while I say this, I think even now, if you look at the kind of thinking which is there in the ministry, I feel the strategic thinking is there. You know, you can see how you are looking at 100 villages to be developed in the rural side, and rural tourism is huge in a global perspective. We see this in a macro sense. So I think the strategy is there, but I think what is important is execution. We need this robust execution, and sometimes we've seen all over the world that democracy doesn't prevail on this whole development front. And another very interesting debate, which I think we can talk till the end of the day, is that normally, if you look at countries, corruption and development goes hand in hand, and it's a very debatable thing. So we are trying to develop new economic theory by saying zero corruption, and we are looking at economic growth, which, you know, it's a strange kind of analogy. But I think
do you say development comes with the compromise of corruption?
See, when you look at theory, you have seen this, and I asked this from a very eminent economist.
But you can have corruption and no development.
well,
Which you have experienced, right?
So that is no fuel.
I mean, some people say it, but oil in the palm, you know, as
We had no oil. That was the whole issue. There was no oil in the sense.
But the conclusion of that discussion, Shail, is that I think we need to have a robust external strategy, you know, and you know, saving money on people going abroad is not the strategy. You know, saying that, you know, I spent only this amount of money when I went abroad is not a victory, you know. I mean, that was good in the first 1 year to say that, yes, we are conscious of public money. It's good. It's a nice feeling to have. But now we want results, you know. We need to make sure, because at the end of the day, I don't know whether you know this data, but the latest data coming out is only 45% of households, their income covers the expenditure.
So Rohantha, see,
But just one on that point, Rohantha. Now you said that you know, saving money from traveling overseas, just saying that is not enough. That is not strategy. But that was said in the context of setting an example to the general public after having, you know, state leaders spend lavishly when, you know, they claimed that we didn't have money to hold an election here in Sri Lanka. So could it be that that was not said as part of, you know, this is our strategy, save money from overseas trips, rather than, you know, this is the example we're setting, while there are others that are being said in strategy? Are you taking it out of context?
No, it's to do with what shall I say, reform from a social perspective, you know, which is good. But I'm saying that's really good. I mean, I don't know if you have worked in the public sector and you realize when you sit on the chair, from the time you sit there, you're getting calls asking, have you given it to this supplier, how much money you can make. These are the normal rhetoric. Today it doesn't exist. And it's an amazing advantage, that the public sector officer can work straight, believe me. But what I'm saying is, that's your first 1 year. But now we have to run. We got to make sure that at least 60% of people's income is going to be more than expenditure. It has to happen. Last July it was 9%, September it moved to 20%, December pepper-cubed research came out at 44%, March is 45%, 1% increase. And now with the electricity prices have to be increased because of IMF regulation, you'll again have it tanking. So we have to find a growth strategy, and exports is crucial. Not only just tourism, exports of services as well as merchandise has to be one strategy.
So Rohantha, what you said here is, I mean, again we are going back to the policy level, right? The strategies and policy, what Joe also said about the foreign policy. I mean, Dhananath, how do you see that in the economic policy? I mean, do you see we have a clear strategy and we are at the moment executing it to basically achieve the growth, to get rid of the economic crisis and to sustain the recovery?
There may be a strategy, but we cannot see it at the tangible level outside. Bringing back on the same argument, like Niresh has said, like this unbundling CEB, all these reforms has been a conversation for the last 30 years and it's not moving, which I agree. The challenge is, Shihar, we all know there's a technicality of anything. For this program to run, this microphone should work, the camera should work. There's no other way that we can reach our viewers without this microphone and the camera. That's like basic. Same way on economic policy. I mean, without doing that reform, then we have to stop talking about a developed country. I mean, then we have to agree that, okay, we'll stay every day at the same place. So, answering your question straight away, we do not see anything. That's what I said. They are not messing it up, but the right thing has to happen faster, because otherwise I will tell you what is going to happen. Now, the saving money, giving that public the confidence that we are not wasting money is good, but that will have a shelf life of about a year, because after a year people are going to ask, like, brother, my electricity price is going up, what's happening? Like, okay, I'm endorsing you for cutting the cost, but it doesn't reflect in my day-to-day budget. My electricity price has gone up by 30%. The people who mounted the solar, their cost has been cut down to, I think, 16 rupees. So they will ask, like, what's happening? And your economy is not growing now. The projection was about 3.1% to 3.5%. That means less number of jobs, less growth. They will ask, like, what's happening? So that shelf life is moving away quite faster. And you can only see results when you do reforms. Now it will take about 2 to 3 years to materialize it. So that's why I'm insisting that do it now. If you wait for next year, after next election, that window will never ever come. So that's why critical about electricity. I quite agree with Chayu, but the challenge is even on the solar. Now they have brought the prices down. The cost is lesser because the base load is what is critical. Either you have to use coal or hydro. So that we need about, I think, couple of $1 billion to upgrade the grid. And we know with the debt commitments, couple of $1 billion to upgrade the grid under a state entity seems quite impossible. I mean, that means another 3 to 4 years of staying in the same way. Like, even if we produce enough electricity, that means we cannot absorb it to our grid.
So the flip side argument on that, at least from the government side, maybe more vocally before they came into power, was that countries like the UK have liberalized their generation, supply, transmission sectors, and they faced higher prices, higher energy prices, especially when the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out, and the government was helpless. They couldn't do anything because now it was more in control of the private sector, and because of that reason, we need to reserve a higher level of control, if not absolute control, on our generation or at least transmission sector of CEB in Sri Lanka. So how would you respond to that?
Two arguments. First is what they have proposed is not a complete privatization, because already, as I mentioned, the generation
side
is
yes.
open. It's the transmission which is the problem. So what they have proposed is the transmission to be owned by the companies, like they are putting a share on the generation side and the distribution side. Number one. Number two, okay, let's look at the Sri Lankan context. Now the government has the control, but now our electricity prices are going to go up by 30% again. So I agree that there'll be no perfect solution even after you privatize. I mean, privatization is not like it won't solve all your problems. There will be challenges. No two words about it. That's where you need that institutional structure of proper regulator when it's required, the PUCSL. That institutional structure has to be strengthened for sure. But the challenge is that those are the reforms that is required. So on strengthening the regulatory agencies and doing that reforms is what is required.
So, but now, Dhananath, I'm unclear. You're saying that it's absolutely pivotal that we go forward with the unbundling and partial privatization of the CEB. Then on the other side, you're saying it's imperative that we, put these structures like the PUCSL and the regulation in line. Which is more important? Are they equally important? Can one go without the other?
It's equally important, Shalin, because when you allow the private sector guys to play, there has to be it's like coming back to the cricket analogy. You can have like Virat Kohli's and Rohit Sharma's and Kumar Sangakkara's, but there has to be an ICC to set the rules. No, they are the one who are deciding. Okay, first 5 overs is there's one set of regulations, and how many overs a bowler can bowl. All sorts of regulation and what's free hit and all that. So that regulatory mechanism has to be there, and it has to come through the independence of that regulatory agency. So that's what I'm concerned, that if we do not move on those hard reforms, and I think the government has a mandate of 2/3 majority. So it's a new context, and they have the mandate. I don't think anyone is complaining about corruption, because I think everyone is quite agreed that the ministers are not corrupt. Or at least it is not happening at this point of time.
But the question is done not now, though they have 2/3 majority, more than 2/3 majority. What are the policies or the laws they have enacted?
Nothing at the moment. Exactly, that's my point. Nothing at the moment.
That's the issue.
That's what I said. I cannot see anything tangible, but the time is the clock is ticking.
Stolen Asset Recovery Act.
Yeah. So clock is ticking. I mean, on the definitely the Stolen Asset Recovery.
Proceeds of crime.
Proceeds of crime.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but it was an act basically ready even under the Ranil's government.
Yeah, but they passed it.
Yeah, of course.
So that's why I'm saying the clock is ticking, and you have to move to those technical, the basic stuff. Without those basic things, it's very difficult to come out from this crisis. And after 5-6 years, we will have the same conversation and the same reforms will be discussed. Without those, if we cannot get these reforms done, but I think we have a golden opportunity because the government has the mandate. Ideologically, I'm not sure, there may be challenges, but I think this seems also open. I mean, if you read their NPP manifesto, I mean, they have basically promised on some of those reforms. It's a matter of getting things done, and that window is closing quite faster, which everyone can see, because then the next time, as I mentioned, the opposition will start playing the opposition politics. Next time, the same opposition who were, when they were in the government, the bills that they brought in, now they will come and oppose to the same bills when this government start moving those bills, because now they are slowly moving to the opposition politics. So we have to accelerate, because it's ultimately, oppositions will always be the opposition and the ruling party will do the...
George, if I may bring this back to the research side. Now, we're talking about possibly 30% increase in electricity tariff. But who's doing the research on this? The effect it would have on various industries, on households, on small and medium enterprises, on the economy as a whole. I mean, these things have to be weighed. It's not just about the CEB. If there's no point in saving the CEB if it's going to sink the country. But this has to come through hard research. Is that being done, or are we just saying, well, we need to do this, so we're going to do it because IMF says so, or because CB is not going to be profitable. Are these just half-baked reactions?
Definitely on the economic front, Dhananath and Chayu are both doing that research. That's how they've gone into these areas in such a thorough manner there. But I guess one of the other basic questions to address there is, once you have done the research, or if you're bringing a policy out, you need to communicate. We are very poor communicators. We're very poor communicators internationally, we're very poor communicators nationally. Are things explained to people? We have an increase coming. Why is that? You heard Dhananath just now explaining how it will have a ripple effect on 5 institutions. Now, if that can be done on this program, and viewers watching that will get a clearer understanding of that particular point as to why that increase is needed, and the IMF, how that plays into this picture, this has to be done on a national level. Everyone in this country, in all 3 languages, have to be kept aware of what is going on. Every decision has to be transmitted in that way. We've got to find ways and means of doing that. Those have got to be the buzzwords. People will then understand, people will realize they are stakeholders. You have to bring them on board. Go back in time, look at something like the Good Friday Agreement. They gave every household a copy of the Good Friday Agreement. Legal terms, they didn't understand it, but they had a copy. And they felt ownership, stakeholders. They were part of the process. And they thought, okay, we've got to support this. And it stood the test of time thereafter. People have got to be informed, people have got to be brought on board. Communication has to be one of the most paramount aspects that we focus on. So the research is done, information is available within policy making structures, that has got to be done effectively. But once a decision has been taken, it has to be very effectively communicated to people out there. At the grassroots level, in urban areas, whoever it may be, everybody has to feel that they have ownership and they understand it. Otherwise, you have politics coming in where people will try to play politics at that point, turn things around in their favor.
So we need to stop being the land of the midnight gazette, where you wake up tomorrow morning, and you find, oh my gosh, this has gone up in price.
If that has happened, the next day we should be explaining why it went up in price. We should be making that very clear to people. And sometimes you might think, oh, you're trying to really spell it out too much. No, you can't do that assessment on your own. You've got to let people know. Some people will feel that's too basic. That's okay. Let it trickle down into every tier of society. Let people understand why a government is doing what they are doing. People will appreciate it when it's explained to them. Because otherwise, they feel like they're outsiders. They feel like there's someone up there in positions of power taking decisions and they have no control of it. And then they rebel against it. Engage with people, get people involved. That really makes a huge difference.
So Chayu, given what's happening globally, right? There is a war going, in Russia, then Israel, and then how Trump is playing his card on tariff and with his diplomacy, and we have a threat from our neighbors like possible nuclear war. How do you see the challenges for Sri Lankan economy on given all these global threats?
I mean, it's the same story that the Sri Lankan economy has always faced with global threats, that we ignore, I think, the fact that we are always very exposed to the global economy. And it doesn't have to be just in the export way. I think in a way we are not very exposed to the export side of things. I mean, about trade exports are about 30% of GDP. I mean, thankfully we didn't go Vietnam, so in a way, because Vietnam's trade exports are close to about 90% of GDP. So in a way, the fact that we didn't grow our exports is helping us at this moment. But we have different exposures. I mean, our tourism is exposed like we discussed earlier. Remittances are exposed at different points, and it's different to the past as well. Now we have more East Asian remittances coming in than we have at any point in the past. And our capital inflows are affected, capital outflows are affected. So there are lots of different ways now that impacts are coming. So I think that's very much a factor. I would think in fundamental context, there once again you are at a point where you once again have a little bit of difference in how that impact comes into Sri Lanka's economy right now, because like I said earlier, now we have a lot of dollars. I'll give you an example from the banking system there to kind of make that point. Historically, I think especially in that 2005-2015 kind of period, the banking system ran net foreign liabilities. They borrowed more from the rest of the world and then they lent that on to Sri Lanka. Since about the crisis and increasing since then, we now run net foreign assets in the banking system. The banking system has more dollars, and In Sri Lanka, you don't really have a lot of dollar-based kind of investment opportunity. So now the banking system is now exposed to dollar-based fluctuations in a way that we weren't in the same point earlier. Earlier, you have liabilities and something bad happens to the dollar, that's probably good for you. Right now, that's different. Right now, the impacts of what happens in the global economy fundamentally changes. Now, I think the first 2 weeks alone of April, you had that massive fall that happened in the dollar's value against the rest of the world's currencies. That hurts if you hold a dollar-based asset. But what happens now when the dollar is once back up to 101, 102 in terms of the dollar index? So these kind of fluctuations really do affect the system. So I think for Sri Lanka, and particularly in a very, very volatile global context, where we have to kind of really engage is, one, what are our strengths? Our strength in the global economy as well as the local economy economically has been our local consumption sector. We have always been a strong consumption economy, and that has buffered us from some sort of global shocks in the past as well. Historically, global recessions have been net positive to the Sri Lankan economy because we import so much oil. Price of oil comes down, that has generally tended to help our economy overall than it has hurt us from the other angle. So that domestic economy really has been a buffer there. But that doesn't mean that part of the problem there is, that means our growth functions into the future have been constrained because we're so focused on this domestic economy side, and that has required all the debt and all the borrowing of the past. In this current moment, I think there are opportunities. I think, like George said at the start, there are quite a lot of opportunities that could be in play as well. And I'm not sure if some of those opportunities are things that we can expect necessarily either. I mean, historically, we talk about how Sri Lanka has missed the bus on the export side, how it's missed the bus on the FDI side, but it's not just Sri Lanka that has done it. South Asia overall as a region has not really done well. I said Sri Lanka's trade exports are about 13% of GDP. Bangladesh, despite everything they've done, is actually lower. FDI in 2023 and 2024 was smaller as a percentage of the economy in India than it was in Sri Lanka. This doesn't mean Sri Lanka has done well on those parts. We absolutely have not. But it does mean regionally it's been a constraint. So if you have a change happening, an opportunity coming in, that is a fundamental shift that happens regionally, and I don't think we have any kind of I don't think we have a reference point to what that looks like, what the positives of that look like, what kind of players, what kind of sectors do well, and what are the new costs that we have to take on to our economy that we don't even know what those costs are. So I think that exposure changes, the nature of that exposure changes right now compared to the past, and that is, I think, one of the biggest risks that the Sri Lankan economy is really facing.
Rohantha, you mentioned the tourism cess fund, 11 billion rupees just sitting there, and this amount seems to get larger every year because there's money flowing in through the tourism levy. And it's not being spent, or very little is being spent. What would you like to see this 11 billion spent on?
Definitely we need to spend some money on research. Whilst the global campaign will roll out, the armory is in place. And Niresh, one thing that has to be told is that though a lot of people think it's easy running a global campaign, with the current tender process in place, it's virtually impossible to award a qualitative contract. It's easy to buy a chair. You'll say lowest price, you give it. But when it comes to selecting an advertising agency, especially when it comes to selecting, different channels, the media partners, selecting models, it's tough. But which is one of the reasons why Ceylon tea, the promotion from the tea board, as well as the Sri Lanka tourism campaigns have got stuck continuously. But whilst I say this, end of the day, when you have a 2/3 majority in the government, you can take strong decisions and move forward. So the armory is in place. Definitely we must spend some good money to get some proper positioning, to show that we are a nation of strong governance to the world. We can use the tourism campaign for that purpose also. And I think we will never get this chance again if we don't utilize it this time, because you have an administration which is clean, you have a government which will support strong decisions, tough decisions, because whenever a campaign is launched, there are hundreds of people who say there is a better campaign. Even if you take Incredible India, when it was researched and to be launched, many people said don't do it. But there was this one tech guy, Amitabh Kant, who said, I'm going to do it. Go and do it. And today, that it's one of the best campaigns in the world. So it will be tough decisions. So I feel that we have to do the global campaign. And then number two, we need to have a good research company. For the first time, we must research and find out why do people come to Sri Lanka. We have never done it. Now I operate in so many other markets. You know, though from the outward we'll say it's people are coming for the sea. Actually, when you go to understand why they are coming, it's nothing to do with the sea. It's to do with so many other reasons why they come. And when you understand those insights, the way that you schedule your flights out of that destination, let's say from South Korea, they know that almost 90% of the guests that come to Maldives is for honeymoon. So they know the times that they get married normally in South Korea. So South Korean Airlines have scheduled the flights in such a way that you don't have to spend money on hotel stays. You land early morning at 6 o'clock, transfer to the resorts, and same way go back. So to that extent, it's not just the traveler, but they look at the whole touch points and the whole experience, how it is. So we need to do good research. And thirdly is that I think we must also ask ourselves, is what we are doing right? Shouldn't this whole structure change? Now, for example, in France, the tourist board is virtually privatized. It's a private entity that runs the whole promotional arm. So I don't know, we need to look at some models, see what's working, and I think we must implement it, because we will never get this chance like what we have got this time. But Niresh, a more fundamental point is that, you know, since the government is very strongly about the nuances of the people, is that I will first of all want to do a research and find out why 2.3 million people didn't vote, and see what happened.
With that, I think we'll have to close the second round on Face the Nation and move on to closing statements from our guests, starting off with Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata.
The problem we have at hand is economic growth, and the question is from which side the growth is going to come. In my view, it is through trade and mainly through productivity. And trade, because that brings competition, and as Rohantha mentioned, India is next door, which we have a big potential, and with all what is happening in the geopolitical context, I think we have an edge. So trade is fundamental. Second is productivity, and also the basics has to set right to attract investments on exports. That basic reforms has to happen, and that's fundamentally important if we are serious about moving forward. And from listening to Rohantha, which I have been a big advocate for states slowly moving out of business and allowing more competition and private sector to run. And we heard from Rohantha, who had been in many committees, boards, they have the money, they have 11 billion rupees. So money is not the problem, but still we are finding it difficult to run a campaign. I think because of the inherent structure of the government. So imagine the same was applied on a private company. If the program trailer runs after the program, it doesn't make sense, right? So same way, if the government starts running business, you heard what is going to happen from Rohantha. The tourism season is now, it's off season and the season is coming up. You are still trying to figure out who are your partners. The same thing will happen when the government starts running business, and that's given, because you cannot really make those decisions faster, because if you try to make it faster, then you bring the problem of corruption, because then things go off control. So trade is important, competition is important, the basics has to set right. There is no way out. So it's better that we move faster, the clock is ticking. As it was said, and the geopolitical context is important, because what we are moving earlier, the system was flawed. There was issues in the system, but now it's moving for more transactional sort of a geopolitical context, with Trump making a lot of decisions. So it's important that we understand that it may not also come in our favor, because we really do not have the higher negotiation power, because Trump seems to be very transactional. And when you go on more transactional basis, again that corruption element can come in, because it's not the rule-based system, you are just trying to make a transaction. So we have to be cautious on that, but the way out is trade, competition, and get the basic reforms right. There is no way out.
Thank you very much, Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata. We now move our attention to Rohantha Athukorala, Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council.
Shalin, I work across 28 countries, and when you travel, you tend to understand the best practices. And I think one of the areas that we have to make a change is the link the private sector and the public sector has with the university system. See, let's say for example MTV wants to start a new product. The question is that research could be done by university, but the question is, whom do you speak to in the university? Do we have a focal point the private sector can talk to? Is there some way that we can go and talk to their undergrad and the postgraduate people and say, listen, I'm doing this, I need this to be done. If someone comes out with a good proposal, I will pick you and you can lead that particular SBU. So that kind of linkage doesn't exist right now in Sri Lanka. Now if you look at the two industries, which is the apparel industry and of course the cinnamon industry, which just got GI certification, they work very closely with a particular university. And the success of that industry is purely based on the knowledge economy that was transferred with the universities. So, which I'm talking about is apparel, So, now these linkages have to come, and I'm part of a team in the current structure where overall new strategy has been developed in the universities, all 17 universities, how it's to be done, and this kind of strong linkages, how it could be brought in. So, now it's a private sector must also start reaching up to these people once it is launched. It's a 4-year strategy, so that then what happens is that you will make decisions which are much more scientific in nature, and that is going to help the overall harnessing of skill, and then of course you could see that the knowledge economy getting kicked in to the country. For example, if you take the FTA with Thailand, let's assume that you operationalize it, there's no products that you can export. Even though you have given them a list that says zero tariff, there is nothing for us to export. So now that decision could have been much more stronger with a university input, and then asking the university system, how are you going to give you the knowledge in terms of sitting with the private sector and asking, how do I reach a $480 billion or $460 billion economy like Thailand? So I think my closing remarks is that it's not only the government that has to make the changes, but I think the private sector also must start asking how they could support this small venture like getting linked to the knowledge economy.
Thank you very much, Rohantha Athukorala, Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council. We now move our attention to George Cooke, Executive Director of the Regional Centre for Strategic Studies.
Shalan, there are challenges. We've heard right throughout the program numerous challenges that we're facing. Every challenge has an opportunity. We've got to go in search of that. Research will help us do that. After having done that, we've got to effectively communicate it. It's a very simple formula. It's not something extremely complicated. It is a small country that we're talking about. We're talking about 21, 22 million people. This is not a country with 400, 500, this is not a 1 billion people country. This is a very small country. We can turn it around. We have got a golden opportunity at the moment. You've heard continuously it being mentioned here, outside, corruption is stopped. Isn't that wonderful? That's exactly what people wanted. Hopefully a majority of people wanted, maybe not everyone. A majority of people wanted it. Those who benefited from it did not want corruption to stop, but corruption has stopped to a large extent. It has now got to trickle down. People are asking, what is the point in saving a little bit here or saving a little bit there? It's setting an example. People now realize if the leader doesn't do it, the next person can't do it, the next person can't do it. This will trickle down in society at every tier of society. This is exactly what we need. This is the change that we need. This is the change that we are now seeing. It has been 6-7 months. We've had 2 elections, we've had a budget, we've had another election. Now's the time it's going to take off. Hopefully that's what's going to happen. That's what we're hoping for. The start has been excellent so far. And if we can put our house in order, make sure that we have the right statistics, the right data, we are aware, we have the best practices, sky's the limit for this country. This country can do so much.
Thank you very much, George Cooke, Executive Director of the Regional Centre for Strategic Studies. We finally move our attention to Chayu Damsinghe, Head of Advisory at Frontier, for your closing remarks.
I think I will make 2 points for my segment. First, I think we are in a world there is a lot of change, and I think that change is the first point. Second point is how you deal with that change. For me, which is a lot of rapid, agile, fast movement. What does that change look like? For Sri Lanka, I think that a lot of that change has already happened. For the world, that a lot of that changing is happening and likely continue happening over the next 2 to 3 years. So how do you engage with an economy, a structure, a society even that has changed so far? And we are dealing with the change in the context of a world that's changing once again in a very dramatic way, ways that haven't really changed in 50, 60, 70 years. That is, I think, the biggest context there, because that means the costs that we're dealing with today, the problems we're dealing with today, I think are different to the problems that we faced in the past. That means there are opportunities today that we can grapple with, that we can work on, that didn't exist in the past. But it also means that the costs of the past might not be what we should focus on. If we're focusing on the costs of the past, I think we might miss those opportunities, and we might also miss the costs of the day that we're actually facing. For the Sri Lankan economy, I think we have a space to look back and see what has changed, and we have the benefit of hindsight there. For the global economy, we don't. We are looking at something that's in the process of changing. So over the next 2 to 3 years, we'll see massive changes, massive things that change, that will fundamentally alter the way the global economy works, fundamentally alter how different players work in the global economy. How do you engage with that? For me, the point is, if you're talking about something that changes, you've got to be open to change yourself. You've got to be open to how you move fast on things, change what you're engaging with, change the output of what your expectations, and how you move to meet those expectations. And that does mean even taking to those points earlier about the the identity, what we want as a brand identity for the country, for tourism or otherwise. I think moving fast on those points of things, aligning to those changing circumstances, and not necessarily the circumstances of the past, not even the circumstances of the present or the future, but I think moving with how every single day, every single year, those circumstances are changing.
Thank you very much, Chayu Damsinghe, Head of Advisory at Frontier. Thank you very much to our journalists, Niresha Lethambi and Shihara Niz, for asking all the right questions. And thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face the Nation. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Tonight, making political history, a record number of women in the new cabinet, while the Liberal Party elects its first female federal leader. Justice for the family of a young WA police officer mown down by a drug-addled car thief. Testimony about death cap identification at Erin Patterson's mushroom murder trial. And a pelican paradise in outback Queensland as floodwaters transform the landscape. Good evening, Michael Tetlow with ABC Late News. After its worst defeat on record, the Liberal Party has elected its first ever female leader. Susan Lee emerged triumphant from the party room meeting, defeating rival Angus Taylor. While the new opposition leader begins to rebuild her depleted party, the